Eric Bischoff is on the line. Eric, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm decompressing after the last couple of days, but doing very well.
I can imagine. Now, one of the things yesterday was a pretty busy day between all the press conferences and all the interviews. I can just imagine, considering all the press that came out of this thing. Did you have any chance, as far as to talk to the booking committee, and will you? How soon before we see, shall we say, new fingerprints on the television product?
It's going to take some time, and I addressed this a little bit yesterday, but these guys, and I'm talking about Ed and Terry and everybody involved in the creative process currently at WCW, have been working more or less in a vacuum without a lot of direction and not able to make a lot of decisions, not really able to make a lot of changes in terms of the roster and taking advantage of people that are available and that kind of thing. But they've done their very best to lay out a plan, and it would be really unfair and probably not wise for me to come in and try to immediately change everything and undo everything that they've done over the last couple of months. So my goal is to come in. I'm going to help when I can. I'm going to throw out a few suggestions here or there when I can, but I think over the next 2 months or so, month and a half, 2 months, I'm going to gradually kind of change the direction of the company and not radically change anything that's going on right now.
But if you see like a finish on Sunday that you think might not be in the best interest of the company, you'll just have them change it?
I can't imagine, and I talked with them a little bit, to answer your first question. I did spend a little bit of time with everybody yesterday after the initial meeting with, department heads and VPs at WCW, and when we made that announcement, and we went through a question and answer period with them, a brief one, and then we went and, did all the press. After we did the press, then, I went in to meet with the booking committee and, kind of heard what they had in mind, heard what they plan on doing at the pay-per-view. Quite frankly, I didn't really hear anything that, made my head spin or my eyes roll back in my head. They've worked really hard, and they're doing some pretty good things. It may not feel like it, but I think there's been a lot more consistency and, cohesiveness in terms of the storylines and direction over the last month or two than there has been in the last 6 months. And they're going to do fine. If I see something I don't like, I'm going to bring it up. I'm not the kind of person that can just sit back and bite my tongue and not say anything. I'll bring it up, and if I come up with a good idea between now and Sunday that I think will improve the show, I'll exert some influence there. But I'll do it in a kind of cooperative, supportive way.
What do you think? And have you gotten assurances from TBS or TNT actually, as regarding like the real frequent preemptions? I mean, there's like 4 and 7 weeks. In this run.
Yeah.
And I think that's just been a total momentum killer.
It has been momentum. It really has, and it's a good point, on your part. Because really, if you take off your critic's hat, and I don't mean you in particular, but all of us, as people who watch, if we take off our critic's hats and that reacts so much to the ratings. But if you really look at it, one of the things that I think has hurt WCW, and it happens every year at this time, quite frankly, but one of the things that has hurt WCW is, those preemptions. People get out of a viewing, out of their viewing pattern. They kind of, if you're getting a little bit of interest in the story and people are starting to follow it week to week, and then all of a sudden it disappears for a week or 2 weeks, if you did have them or you were starting to get to them a little bit with a good story, you lose them just as quickly. And I don't think the last week's ratings really is reflective of the interest that they've been able to build, over the last month or two in their stories. So in terms of have we gotten assurances, I don't know that was really part of the negotiation. TNT, just like, TNN or USA did, they're going to have, the right to, take advantage of programming opportunities that they feel are important to them. And if that involves us getting preempted from time to time, I'm sure we're going to be. But I think TNT and TBS both recognize that, this is a valuable, property for them, and quite obviously that was a big part of the negotiation, and that's why we have the long-term relationship that we have. And they also recognize that it's not in anybody's best interest to consistently preempt the show.
But the 22nd is still preempted?
I don't have the schedule, to be honest with you. I haven't looked at it.
It's going to air on the 23rd, the show on the 22nd.
Yeah.
I think they're doing, was it 2001 on the 22nd?
Yeah. I don't have that schedule in front of me.
Now, in the role that you're going to be in, you are pretty much more. Would you say that you're going to be more autonomous as far as like the ability to make deals than you were than you were when you were working for TBS? Because I know that you and I have talked in the past that there were a lot of deals and a lot of wrestling in the future. As much as we always talk about booking and if the pay-per-view is good or bad. In the big picture, this business is dominated by making the right deals.
Well, it is, and I don't. It's not so much about me having individual autonomy and being able to run off and go make deals that I, alone think are good deals. It's about the company and the people involved in the company being able to make those decisions, and not having individuals who are really not involved in the company and really don't understand the business or recognize what those opportunities really mean to a company like WCW, having the ability to either slow down the process or in some cases, make a decision that has a negative impact on WCW, quite honestly because they just really don't understand it in WCW's world or context. So I think, without question, those of us at WCW, whether it be in marketing or promotion or creative or production or whatever area, the business units are certainly going to be able to make decisions much more quickly and from an entrepreneurial approach as opposed to, a very kind of pragmatic corporate approach. I'm afraid that, I'm going to say things that are going to be, reflected, or I'm going to make a statement that reflects poorly on Turner or Time Warner, and I certainly don't mean to do that. It's just a different culture. And certainly we're going to be in an entirely different environment and an entirely different culture now.
Are you planning on being a television performer, or are you going to be behind the scenes completely as pertains to that?
My preference is, and I know, this, has been asked before, and it doesn't really matter what I say because no one's going to believe me when I say it anyway, but I don't really enjoy. And parts of me enjoy it. I mean, it is a rush to be able to go out there in front of people and when you get the kind of reaction that, we used to get or I used to get, and they're throwing stuff at you and they're screaming, and, that was my job is to make people hate me, and I was good at it, naturally. But, and that's a rush. I guess it's probably why, rock stars refuse to retire and actors just, love to play Broadway because you have that direct connection with the audience and it's a sensation that you really can't get any other way. And I like that, but that's not really what I do best. And there was a time when, when we launched the NWO and we established the wrestlers versus the company and all of that, it made sense. That was a logical role for me in some regards, although some people will disagree with that, but it made sense because I was, the head of the company. But I'm so tired of that storyline. I'm so tired of wrestlers versus, the company that if that's not the premise, then there's really not a role for someone like Eric Bischoff because I'm not a wrestler. I'm never going to be a wrestler. I'm too old. I'm too fat. And I'm really not interested in trying to learn that craft at this stage of my life. So there probably won't be a role for me, but it's because there probably isn't going to be the company versus the wrestler premise.
Do you think you might have spread yourself too thin back in the late 90s when you were trying to do that and creative?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no question that I spread myself too thin, but I don't think it was because of my time on camera. And quite, I mean, I lived it and I know it how it affected me. And to be very honest, that was probably more than anything being able to forget everything else that I was doing and go out and perform, for 2 minutes or 6 minutes or 10 minutes on a Monday night was a relief for me. It was like taking the pressure valve in the back of my head and, releasing all that pressure and going out and actually having fun with what we do. But in terms of being spread too thin, I was spread too thin because, quite honestly, and again, I don't want to criticize anybody at this point, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but I was a one-horse race back then. I did just about everything that needed to be done, and I was involved, in many ways, much more deeply in areas that I should not have been involved with, and it was unfortunate that I had to be involved with them, but somebody had to do the work. And, one of the mistakes, that a lot of people make, and I was certainly one of them, is not surrounding yourself with people that are really, really good at what they do so that you don't have to be involved in every aspect of the business because, you just can't. You just can't. And that's how I spread myself too thin not necessarily as a result of being a performer.
Okay, we're here with Eric Bischoff, the new president of WCW, former president of WCW, as a matter of fact. When we go back, this business has changed so quickly. And you go back 2 years from now, January 4th, 1999, a little over 2 years and 1 week from today, actually. It's just amazing when you think about, WCW at that point. While WWF was ahead in the ratings a little bit. I think you were doing in the mid-4s in the ratings. You did a Georgia Dome show that did just under $1 million, like $930,000. And that was the period where it started going down. I mean, when you look in hindsight, the big build-up and then the big fall, what could have been avoided? And another question I have is, with all the reports of the losses this year, like $60 million, even more, how does that happen? I mean, I guess is it just that the revenue decreased that much? Was it, I mean, when I look at the year before, I mean, there were losses. Those were believable losses. When I started hearing the middle of last year, and they were starting that number of 80 million and 70 million started showing up, it was like, how does this even happen?
Well, you covered a lot of ground on that question, so let me rewind it a little bit. First of all, to go back to January of '99, and you're right. I mean, we put 35 or 40,000 people, or whatever the number was. Maybe it was 25. I don't remember the number of people, but it was close to $1 million in revenue. Pay-per-views were still doing substantial numbers. A bad pay-per-view was a 0.7 or a 0.8. Which are still generating a tremendous amount of revenues. And pay-per-views are just generally so profitable to begin with. The cost of putting on a pay-per-view, compared to the amount of, revenue you generate with them it makes it, one of the most profitable, business units, in the entire business of wrestling. But, what happened, I think if you look back at what we did, we built a monster. We took WCW from, $24 million a year to, in excess of $200 million a year within 48 months. And we built up a pretty substantial infrastructure in the process, and most of that, quite frankly, was in talent, which everybody knows. That was the method that we used to build the business. And, again, it's easy to criticize it in retrospect and talk about what people would have done differently now that they know, how the business has changed. But I doubt anybody really knew, what was going to happen, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in advance, back at that time. But, yeah, we built it up. We got the talent. It was a bidding war between both companies, and both companies ended up having to change the way they compensated talent. Vince McMahon was never gave guarantees before, whether they were called downside guarantees or otherwise, generally never did that. And he was forced to do it. We were forced to compete with him. His business model, created opportunities that, quite frankly, the business that I inherited when I took over WCW, it didn't provide those opportunities. When I took over WCW, when I went to work for WCW, for that matter, in 1991, there was no opportunity for an announcer or a character, for that matter, or a wrestler of any kind, to share in the upside of a pay-per-view, or to profit share in licensing, or to profit share in merchandising. The only way that WCW could really compensate for the way their business was structured was to offer salary guarantees, because any talent is going to come in and say, well, okay, I want to work for your company, but what's in it for me? How am I going to benefit? And if you can't show them, a model that says, well, you're going to generate revenue in a way that is a little bit different, because you're going to share in the pay-per-view revenue, you're going to share in licensing, you're going to share in merchandising, you're going to share in house show revenue, then you have to be able to say to them, well, since we're not going to offer you that, we're going to offer you a flat guarantee. That's what Turner did and WCW did when they bought the business and established the business, in 1990 and 91. Now, to a certain extent, it was my job to build the business, and I did it by attracting talent, and I attracted talent by offering them a better compensation package, which really isn't any different than, the movie business or any other area of sports. And it worked. We took WCW to profitability for the first time in their history, and we not only took it to profitability to the first time in their history, but without the benefit of having, statistics in front of me, we probably increased revenues over 1,000% within a 48-month period of time. That's substantial, and that, it was huge. But when, in retrospect, when you look back, and when WCW was on top, and when WCW was winning, and when they were taking the water coolers out of, Titan Towers, and I don't mean this, actually, but, figuratively, when Vince was laying people off, and it looked like financially their backs were up against the wall, and they were making drastic cutbacks in every area of their business, and it was financial doom and gloom. He said, "Okay, wait a minute, I've got to compete, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to abandon family entertainment. I'm going to go with a Howard Springer, Jerry Springer, Howard Stern approach to wrestling. And I'm going to attract that male 18 to 39-year-old audience." Instead of, the children that I've been marketing to for so long. And when he did that, the audience that we kind of owned at that point, which we did. I mean, we were outperforming the WWF in every measurable category, in every demographic. We owned that 18 to 39-year-old demo. But when he changed his format and he changed the content of his show, a huge chunk of our audience, and it didn't happen instantly, but it happened over a 10-month period or 12-month period. But the most important chunk of our audience in terms of ad sales revenue and pay-per-view revenue began to drift away from WCW because, quite frankly, we weren't giving them what the competition was giving them. The competition was giving them, over-the-top, controversial, in-your-face, sex, violence, breast, middle fingers, chugging beer. I mean, hey, when I was between 18 to 39-year-old, I would have left too. Because it was much more, it was much more rock and roll than what we were offering. We were trying to produce a show that was safe for children and was a safe show for parents to watch with their 5 and 7-year-old children, and we did. Unfortunately, that wasn't where the audience was, and that's what So, yeah, we built up this monster. We built up a talent roster in order to be competitive. We made long-term commitments in order to be in the business, and it worked until the game changed. And when the game changed and that huge chunk of audience just shifted, we were left with the long-term commitments we made to get to the dance, but could no longer compete in a way that allowed us to sustain, the machine and keep feeding the machine. So that's where the losses came. And the losses, quite frankly, are indeed losses in revenue. They're not. It's not that the expenses kept going up. My talent, the talent budget when I left in 1999 was not much higher than it was in 97 and 98 when we were kicking everybody's rear end. And we're making, money hand over fist, and they were giving me Rolex watches, with my bonus checks. The talent budget hadn't increased. What changed is the drop-off in pay-per-view revenue, the drop-off in licensing, the drop-off in merchandising, the drop-off in ticket sales. That's where you see those monster losses coming from, not on the expense side, but on the revenue side.
So have you thought about maybe restructuring the contracts when, everyone's 90 days rolls over, or the current contracts come up, and do some sort of like a downside guarantee that the WWF does? So when things are good, guys make more. When things are bad, they make less.
Well, we've talked a lot about that, and a lot of that is probably going to happen, although, I don't know the details yet. And, we haven't, framed a contract model that's, that I could address in any specific terms. But obviously something needs to change. And, a lot of things need to change. And certainly because of the nature of our business and because of the responsibilities that talent has, it almost requires and mandates that there is an incentive-based agreement. Because quite frankly, it's not just about showing up at TV, doing what you're asked to do, and going home. It's about, performing to the best of your ability on television. It's about making personal appearances. It's about, making the house shows and being enthusiastic and working hard when you get there, not just showing up because, the guy sitting there checking you in is going to report you for being late. If you don't show up, you're in breach of contract. It requires a whole different the talent has to have a whole different relationship to the business of our business than they do when it's just a guaranteed, contract. So for all of the right reasons, both from, financial protection, if you will, so that when things are good, everybody benefits, and when things are bad, we don't get killed, but also from, just the psychology of what the business responsibility is, with the talent and what their responsibility is to the business, that dynamic changes as well.
Is there? I mean, a lot has been talked about as far as the age of a lot of the top guys when the company started going down, and now they're 2 years older. There's what. I mean, do you have a framework on what you're going to do? Because clearly, to make it, you're going to have to make some new stars, whether they're someone that's working for another company. You're not going to be grabbing Vince McMahon stars, as we've talked about. Whether it be, I mean, there's a lot of guys. I mean, and listeners of the show have been sending me names. I mean, there's a lot of guys that you could bring in as underneath and mid-card guys, and then be in nice programs and they're good workers. But there's only a few people in this world that turn into The Rock and Steve Austin and people like that. And
Bill Goldberg.
Bill Goldberg was there for a while. They're harder to create, and when they start getting going, I mean, you've got to light the rocket on them too, or else they'll stagnate.
Yeah, well, I mean, I obviously agree with you. There's no disagreement, but my perspective may be slightly different. I'm not sure. When you say Steve Austin, the first thing that comes to my mind is Steve Austin. Although he's chronologically, he's certainly not an old guy, but Steve has been around this business for I'm guessing. I haven't written a biography on him or anything, but I think he must have been around for 10, 12 years.
10, 11 years, yeah.
And that means he's been in the business for at least 8 years before he really made it big. The Rock is a phenomenon, and The Rock and Bill Goldberg, although certainly The Rock has maintained his popularity, more so. But there's only two guys that I can think of in recent history in either company that have made it to the main event and stayed there. I don't mean just danced the dance once or twice or worked into a main event for a 3-month period and then disappeared into main card, to a main card or middle of the card status again. But there's only two guys, Bill Goldberg and The Rock, who have been in the business for less than 10 years, who have made that mark. And the reason Bill Goldberg did it, one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the biggest reasons Bill Goldberg did it is because of his natural charisma, his look, his ability in the ring, but almost as importantly, because of the timing. When Bill Goldberg came in, WCW was hot. I mean, almost everything we did was perceived to be hot. And he was a guy who stepped in a big way at the right time and made a huge impression. Fortunately for The Rock, he did the same thing. When The Rock really, came into his own in the WWF, it was when the WWF was really at its peak, and it made a guy like The Rock, who has more natural charisma than any human being I've ever seen. I mean, the guy drips charisma and style, and you bring someone like that in when you're hot, and it just makes it that much easier. But you take those two guys out of the equation, Bill Goldberg and The Rock, and what you're essentially left with are workers, wrestlers, who learn their craft to develop their skill and develop a relationship with an audience, in a 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 year period of time. And
WWF of late, and it's really phenomenal, but they've taken guys, Kurt Angle, Edge, and Christian, I mean, really over a 2-year, 3-year period. And Angle even less. Angle really in 1 year. I mean, historically in wrestling, it usually was taking, people years and years, except for the occasional, freak, that just had it and made it quick like The Rock. But WWF is really, they've really, it's amazing what they've done in the last 2 years with young guys that were nobodies in this business, 18, 24 months ago, that are now doing television commercials and, even if they're, they're basically, Kurt Angle's going to be a superstar as long as he physically can hold up, I think, and Edge and Christian, I think they got it 15, they may have 15 more years.
I agree, and they have done a phenomenal job, and it's turned into a talent factory. But my point was going to be when you're hot and you've got guys that are over, the formula is to, number one, be smart enough to identify the people who have the potential, and then move them into the dance with the guys who are already over. So there's that rub, so to speak, with your top talent, and you move them up in a logical, methodical kind of a way. Do I recognize that needs to be, the formula? Absolutely, I do. Do we have a plan to do that? I think we do. I think I've got a pretty good idea how to do that. But the first order of business is to get hot, The second order of business, and it happens almost simultaneously, is to go out and start recruiting people that you think have that X factor. And, we've got, some ideas that are, and I know, when I tell you that I'm not going to talk about them, it's not that I don't have an idea, but some of it's fairly proprietary. It's different. It's a little unique approach, and, sharing it isn't exactly in our best interest right now. But, it certainly is going to be a priority, because I agree with you. Without new talent, fresh faces that are compelling and exciting and at least have the potential to move into that, main event spot, you're forced to tell stories with the same roster that you've been telling stories with for too many years, and it doesn't work.
Well, there's something in Variety today, some speculation about sitting down with WWF, trying to put together a joint pay-per-view. I mean, do you really think that's feasible? I mean, and I couldn't see it now. I mean, maybe in a year, but do you think it's feasible that they would work with a group that has been their opposition since the beginning of time, basically?
No, I don't know where that came from. I haven't read that article. It certainly didn't come from me. I think, it was either taken out of, I would guess it was either taken out of context or somebody was reading between lines. I don't see that as reality. And, I know people think, we've all heard, people talk about, what a monster pay-per-view it would be and, all the different kinds of opportunities it would present. And in some, in one sense I understand it and I agree with it, but there's a reality as well. And the reality is, Coke and Pepsi are never going to joint market Coke and Pepsi. Ford and General Motors are never going to work together and try to design a new car and come out with a joint venture, product in the marketplace. So, it makes a lot of sense to some people for a lot of reasons, and it's fun to think about. But the reality is, it's just not going to happen. And I don't, like I said, I don't know where that story came from.
You had a lot of success with the NWO angle, which was pretty much, I guess, somewhat of an interpromotional angle. And you made a comment last night on WCW Live about how there was probably a better, smarter way to do that angle. And one of the things we'd always thought was the whole NWO angle was set up over a course of many years, and when all was said and done, WCW never got its big win over the NWO, and it just kind of sort of fizzled out from there. And do you think that hurt the company, that WCW never got the big win and was kind of portrayed as the loser in the end, or do you think that that wasn't the case?
No, I think in a sense you're right, but and I think I agree with what you say, but I may agree with it for slightly different reasons than perhaps you have. When I said I think there was a better, smarter way to do it, what I meant was, and I'll give you very specific examples of what I mean. When you have a brand like WCW, and then you have popular characters, and when I say popular, I don't mean the fact that the people like them or dislike them, but I mean that they feel strongly one way or the other. When you have a Scott Steiner or a Kevin Nash or a Scott Hall at the time, or a Hollywood Hogan at the time, come out, or an Eric Bischoff, because I was guilty of it too, come out and even though it's creative, and even though we know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it, and it's a cooperative effort, but when you come out and you say things that don't support the brand, and for example, when Scott Steiner, and I'm not picking on Scott because he was doing it at probably my direction, would come out and say, WCW sucks. Well, even though it was part of, if you want to call it a storyline, it's probably not the smartest thing to do, which is an understatement.
Yeah.
There's a better way to do it. There's got to be a smarter way to tell the same story and to position people, in their points of view the same way, but to do it without necessarily degrading the brand that, is so important. And that's what I meant. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think whether WCW finally got the big win or didn't get the big win, I think that would be, that's mandated more by, storyline and timing and, who's a part of WCW and who's not, or who was a part of WCW and who wasn't at the time. But I think the process of building the story and how you treat the brand is where we probably made some mistakes and could have been smarter.
Yeah, because I think if Rock were running down Steve Austin and he constantly said that he sucked, and he just kept beating Austin on every show, then Austin would suck.
Yeah, exactly.
But if in the end Austin got his big win and won the title or whatever, in a way it would kind of show that, the heel Rock.
Well, the heel was wrong, and he doesn't suck. No, I agree with you. I agree. I think we're probably saying the same thing from probably slightly different angles, but I agree with you.
What about working with other companies? And we've gotten really a flood of emails regarding the idea of Paul Heyman as a booker, because clearly his company is in a lot of trouble right now. It may not even be around very much longer. They have some good talent that's been exposed to only a niche audience. What are your thoughts on working with him, bringing him into the thing? Something like that, and also working with New Japan, which you had a relationship with for years and years, the relationship that's fallen apart, and also with Ultimo Dragon, because they've got some of the most awesome young workers that no one's ever seen, although they are all Japanese.
Well, again, Dave, you covered more ground with one question than anybody I've ever talked to. First of all, with ECW and Paul, I don't remember who said it. I think it was. It doesn't matter. Someone once said, the reports of our demise are premature. I've been hearing that Paul Heyman, is in financial trouble for as long as I can remember, and that he may not be around for another week or another month for as long as I can remember. So I don't know that that's true or not true. In terms of working, with ECW, I just don't see it. I mean, I think I just don't see it. Let me just leave it at that. I won't say it'll never happen, because I've learned that there is no such word as never. I'm living proof of that in the wrestling business. But I just don't see it as likely or probable for a variety of different reasons. Yeah, they have a lot of I'm not exactly sure of what their roster is like right now. I'm familiar with some of their guys and some of their top guys, and I do believe that they have great talent and ability. Whether or not they're interested in coming to WCW, whether or not they're really available, which is always a mystery when it comes to WCW or ECW, because their contracts are like they're hard.
Yeah, I think pretty much everyone's available now, though. But they've all been breached, and Heyman wants to get away from out of their payroll as far as the top guys. They a lot of them have been paid.
Well, I'll take your word for that, but until an attorney would tell me that, I just I'll assume that they're really not available. But if indeed they are, and if indeed they were, and they were excited about coming to WCW, then yeah, I'd love to talk to them. But I don't think that should be the primary strategy here. Certainly, if there's talented people out there and they're working for another company and they want to come to WCW, then obviously I want to talk to them and I want to take advantage of that. But the real opportunity here is going to be our ability to find an innovative, aggressive, efficient way to identify, develop, and expose new talent. That's going to be the make or break point of this initiative. It's not going to be whether we can get a guy from ECW or get a guy from WWF or get a guy from New Japan. Now, let's talk about New Japan. I still have a great I've maintained my personal relationship with the principals at New Japan, throughout this entire process. The relationship fell apart between WCW and New Japan to a certain extent. But my relationship with them, was maintained and it still is, and I'm still communicating on a weekly basis and have been, since last September when I left. I look forward to meeting with the principals at New Japan as early as possible. I would be surprised if we don't do something with them, because I know they want to and I know I want to, and I know that it can make sense. In terms of Ultimo Dragon, I can't wait to talk to him. And I think the fact that he's got a lot of great guys that are Japanese is an asset, not a liability. I've always believed that. I think I've demonstrated that over the years. I think there's a place, and I think there's a way, and I think there are probably better ways than I've been able to think of in the past to integrate the Japanese style and the culture and the talent into what we do, if not on a regular weekly basis, at least on a regular enough basis that this audience appreciates what they have to offer, and it makes the show feel different. And I think that's one of the key ingredients.
Now, I know you don't want to be too specific on the whole talent issue, but are you going to be looking primarily for guys that are currently wrestling right now, or maybe guys that have just a lot of charisma and the look that can maybe be taught to wrestle, or a combination of both?
No, I think Brian Vidal, my partner, said it best the other day in an interview, and I'm not even sure he realized how right he was when he said it. But it's amazing, whether it's rock and roll or feature films or television. It's amazing sometimes where talent comes from. And we've all read about legendary stories of Hollywood feature film stars being discovered and at soda fountains and things like that, and there are. I mean, if you think about the people that are walking around right now that have a natural charisma and ability, and the camera loves them, and they can walk into a room and light it up, and they're entertaining and they're funny and all that, and if you can find a way efficiently to find them, train them, motivate them, do what you need to do, promote them, work them into a storyline, the better you can do that, the more likely you are going to be successful, whether you're a record label or a movie studio or a wrestling company. And to answer your question, I want to look outside of the normal course of business. The normal course of business in professional wrestling is you have a training camp, you have a relationship with some regional promotion, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's a good thing, and I want to do that too, but it's not enough. That's the normal course of business. That's how we operate.
And you were pretty cryptic about the power plant yesterday.
I'm sorry?
You were pretty cryptic about the power plant yesterday. Is that something you think is a
Well, I didn't mean to be cryptic. The power plant at one point was, I don't want to say the cutting edge, but it was kind of a celebrated process. Life magazine was talking about it, and we were bringing people in, and we were training people. But it was, I want to say this and make it sound the wrong way, but it was kind of like throwing mud up against the wall and praying that something would stick. You bring in 100 people, and whether they were bouncers that knew somebody, or ex-football players, or badasses, or ex-boxers or kickboxers, or whatever it is, guys who at one level or another have demonstrated some physical skills, and you bring them in, you teach them how to you teach them how to wrestle, and then you pray that one of them's got some charisma. That's kind of a screwy process, and I think there's a better way to do that, and that's what we're trying to identify.
Are you going to have? Because one of the things I think that's been lacking in that training is, and with a lot of the guys, and I think it's hurt a lot of the guys' progress to get to the top, is the interview ability, because it's probably more important now than it's ever been, the nature of the business. I mean, are you going to get acting coaches or something like that? So some guy who's charismatic but stiff as a board when he does an interview, that you can get something out of him?
I think coaching, politicians use them, actors use them, athletes use them, sports announcers use them, and I think, what you're referring to as, acting coach or a dialogue coach or whatever you want to call it, I think is a smart idea, and that's something that, we have talked about, and I think we probably will do. And I think that's one element. I think that's one important piece of business that needs to be addressed. It's something, again, that we've never done. WCW's never done that. What we've done in the past, and the only thing I've ever been exposed to, quite frankly, in the past is, you find a piece of talent, the guy's got some physical skills, and then you hook him up with someone like an Arn Anderson or, Vern Gagne used to spend a lot of time, coaching people on how to do an interview because he felt, and I think, in his time he was a great interview. But, you'd hook him up with another wrestler who was recognized as having, pretty good mic skills, and you try to teach him that way. But, that's not enough. There's a better way to do it. And, yeah, to answer your question, yeah, that's one of the things that we'd love to do.
As far as talent, well, one thing, talent, there's been a lot of problems, both with occasionally talent not wanting to do jobs, or there was a deal a couple of weeks ago where Scott Steiner and DDP had their little skirmish, and I think that part of it is just the whole atmosphere of being there for the last year has been so depressing for a lot of the guys because quite frankly you don't know what's going to happen next. But is there there have been instances where guys are out there cutting promos saying things that have nothing to do with storyline and probably are things that it's exactly the opposite of what they probably should have been saying at times. And it just kind of seems like because they have charisma and they're, quote, top guys, they kind of have carte blanche to almost get away with things. And that lack of discipline, I think, has really hurt the company because then you have the guys who can't get away with it, you start thinking double standard, and it just really, it really just works against everything. Plus, when you're doing an interview that has nothing to do with the storyline, ultimately, what benefit is it? You know what I mean?
No, I can't agree with you more, and it was painful to watch. And managing talent, particularly at WCW because of the nature of our agreements. I mean, look, I probably shouldn't go into this level of detail, but Vince McMahon has the ultimate hammer. If you piss Vince off, you're no longer in the main event, you're in the opening match. And when that happens, your merchandise dries up. And when that happens, your share of the house show goes down, and your share of the pay-per-view goes down, and your personal appearances go away. And a lot of other things start happening that are not good. That's the ultimate hammer, because you can hit them in the pocketbook. And at WCW, that was not the case, and in many cases right now is not the case. It's hard to hit somebody in the pocketbook with a guaranteed contract, and it's unfortunate that you have to be able to try to think that way and be able to have that kind of leverage in order to motivate people. But at the same time, I will say that part of the reason that kind of dysfunction was taking place at WCW wasn't just because of the contracts. It was quite honestly because of lack of direction and lack of leadership and lack of anything that resembled, intelligence and order and a common goal. And, when things were hot at WCW, when we were on top and I was running around thumping my chest and we were all happy and everybody was thrilled, in many respects, you still had talent that didn't want to do what they were asked to do, that had their own opinions about storylines. I mean, you had all the same issues, but generally you were able to manage it because, everybody was winning in a lot of different ways. When you're getting your ass kicked and you're losing and there's no direction, there's no decision-making process, there's no logic, there's no leadership, it's really hard to motivate anybody to do anything, really. And I said this, the other day, or maybe it was last night. Success is the greatest motivator in the world. These guys, at the end of the day, take their contracts aside. At the end of the day, they're competitive. They love to perform. They love to succeed. And sure, they want to benefit financially like everybody does. But the core of it is that they're performers. And I think if we become successful again, if we give them a reason to think that this is going to work, if all of a sudden people start showing up again, if merchandise starts selling again, if ratings start inching up again, it's a lot easier to get people to do what you want them to do because they have more confidence in you. So, I'm not really worried about that. Yes, it's been a problem. There's no question that it's out of control. I've been sick to my stomach at some of the stupid stuff that I've seen going on in WCW. It's like watching your kid dodge cars on a busy freeway. It's been horrible to watch. But I'm not worried about, my ability to improve it. Well, of course, anybody could improve it at this point, but I'm not worried about my ability to get us to a point where that's no longer the biggest issue.
So I'm going to ask you about a couple of names. Obviously, the first one that everyone's been asking about, that you're probably, what about Hulk Hogan?
Hulk and I are very close friends. We've remained in contact, throughout this entire process. I probably talk to him, if not every day, every other day, for a couple minutes here or there, and sometimes longer. We're going to be negotiating with Hulk. It's something that's important to me, and I think there's value there. I think he's an important part of this industry. There's a tremendous, brand value in that Hulk Hogan name, and I think he can be a huge asset for us. That being said, probably not a huge asset in the way that, people assume I think he's going to be a huge asset. And, I need to let it go at that. But we are in negotiations with him. I hope, it's my hope, that he's going to be a big part of what we do in ways that I think are going to surprise people. But, I don't know that that's going to happen for certain, and I think it'll, play itself out over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks.
As far as, what about some of the guys, your thoughts on some people who've just recently been let go in the company, Scott Hall, Juventud Guerrera, Mark Madden, any thoughts on any of them coming back or not right now, or?
Scott in my opinion, and I know Scott pretty well, and I've had to, in very uncomfortable ways and ways that I wouldn't choose, have had to deal with Scott on a number of different levels, and not all of it has been pleasant at all. But when his head is right, when he's under control and when his head is screwed on straight, he's really one of the most creative, dynamic, people in this business. And I don't mean just inside of the ring. He's a very, very smart, creative guy that has got, incredible instincts about, the audience and this product. That being said, unless Scott can figure out a way to get his head screwed on straight, he's tough to work with. It would be my hope, because I'm an eternal optimist, unfortunately, in some respects. It would be my hope, that Scott can get himself under control and we could find a way to make it work. But that's really in Scott's control and not in my control. And I hope it works out that way, but I don't know if it will or not. I don't know any other way to answer that. In terms of Juventud, I don't know. I really wasn't involved in what happened. The only thing I know about is what I've read, and quite honestly, I'm not sure I believe everything I've read. So, I'd be wanting to talk to Juventud again. I have my own experience with Juvi, and not all of it has been good. And I like him personally, but I've heard so many excuses and explanations and reasons why certain things happen that after a while you kind of get tired of hearing it. And Juventud's one of those guys that I think has to kind of prove himself to whoever he's going to be working for, whether it be me or WWF or somebody else. In terms of Madden, quite frankly, I said this to Mark, a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, right after he got let go, and he called me, and I said, Mark, this is not a personal, condemnation of you or anybody else, but quite frankly, too many people who are announcers in WCW feel like they're more important than the show. Like, we spend 2 hours every night on Nitro for the sole purpose of trying to figure out ways to get announcers over. Announcers are a necessary evil, and I am one, or I was one, and I feel that way strongly because I was one. I knew what my role was as an announcer. Our job is to enhance the things that are taking place on camera or in the ring, not for the things that are happening in the ring to be happening in order for us to enhance ourselves. And I got all backwards and screwed up. Now, I'll say that, and I'll also say that I'm not sure it was Mark's fault. I don't think there was a whole lot of direction, or I don't think there was anybody that was explaining that or controlling the announcers at that time. But in terms of do I plan on hiring anybody back, no, there are no immediate plans. But, there's some talented people out there that are no longer with the company. And, Madden is a talented guy. He's got some potential. There's some great things about Mark Madden. But and I hate to say it because it's The Rock, but as The Rock says, you got to know your role. And an announcer's role is not to be the star. An announcer's role is to make the stars.
I'm going to ask you about Vince Russo. I think it's pretty much universally agreed on that he really hurt WCW very badly. But I think a lot of people would also agree that in the right role, he helped out the WWF. He was a creative guy. He had a lot of ideas that had to kind of be weeded out. And do you see any role for Vince Russo in the company, or have you pretty much just decided it's not going to work?
Let me answer that with this response. When I was let go in September 1999, sometime in October, I think, Harvey Schiller called me, and he said, because it was actually, Harvey and I had been talking about me coming back anyway in kind of a different role, 30 days after I left. So we were still communicating, and Harvey said, what do you think about Vince Russo? And I said, Harvey, it's one of two things. Either Vince Russo sold you guys a bill of goods, and he really wasn't as an important part of WWF's, turnaround as he's convinced you he was, or Vince McMahon is a moron for not having him under contract. Because if Vince Russo was as critical and important and creative to the turnaround of the WWF, product and brand, Vince McMahon is smart enough to have locked him up. So I said, by virtue of the fact that he was available and he wasn't under contract, you just have to make the decision for yourself. Is Vince Russo what he says he is, and has he done what he said? Has he actually done what he says he's done, or is Vince McMahon a moron? And I think I think we know the answer to that. I don't think that Vince Russo was as important in the turnaround process to WWF as many people, including, obviously Vince Russo says he was. I'm sure that he had a lot to do with it, and I'm sure, particularly at the time, and again, going back to my earlier comments tonight, when Vince McMahon said, "Okay, screw it, we're going to, damn the torpedoes, we're going to do Howard Springer meets Jerry Springer meets Howard Stern meets wrestling," that's Vince Russo's forte. But that's a bag of tricks with, it's a very limited bag of tricks. I don't think that Russo really had the ability to contribute much beyond, the shock value in TNA and Howard's, Howard Stern approach to wrestling.
The thing with WWF, when the sponsors started pulling out a year ago, and they were forced to tone down, there are points where some, the ratings have actually gone down a little bit now, but when they first toned down, the ratings actually went up. Then they, and I think that the ratings decline is just because there's been a little bit of staleness here and there, yet, their pay-per-views are still strong. Their house shows are doing very, very well. So, overall, nothing fell when they cleaned up. And when you guys, WCW, started doing really raunchy, you went down. You didn't go up. You know what I mean? And that, that whole excuse of he wasn't allowed to go as far as he wanted to.
That was such I don't mean to cut you off, but that was such a punk excuse. To be honest with you,
yeah.
I know where you're going with this. Look, when Vince Russo came to WCW and said, "This is how I turn the WWF around," and convinced everybody that was lightning in the bottle. All we had to do was do TNA and go over the top and do this, the stupid crap that they were doing, and that was going to turn the business around. And WCW, in their desperation, said, "Okay, fine, go do it then. Do it for us." The reason it didn't work is because it had already been done. Nobody remembers the second guy that stepped on the moon. The first guy that did that was Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon went out and he did something that had never been done before in terms of that type of content. And when you're the first, when you're first to the marketplace, you're probably going to win with it. But, to try to be a weak copy of that or even a strong copy of that is a failed experiment. It's not going to work. And that's why it didn't work, and that's why our ratings went down. And quite frankly, when you talk about the WWF's ratings, going down when they've kind of cleaned up their act, as you say,
they've gone up and down. But
they've gone up and down. But I think if their ratings have gone down at all, it's because of the change of net. I mean, they went from the USA
change of networks hurt, no doubt,
to TNN. And I'm not disparaging TNN, but it's not the USA Network. I mean, they've been there for how many years? So I think their numbers are going to come back up. I think they're going to be fine. And they're not going to have to go to the extremes that they went through in the past in order to get those numbers up.
Let's start going to the calls. Let's go to Rob in Oregon. I thank you for your patience.
Yeah, hi. This is the infamous Robbie Lekovich with the...
oh, my God. You did an awesome job, and I didn't read the whole thing yet, but I've heard so many compliments about you today.
Really? That's great.
Yeah.
Did you get to the cruiserweight stuff yet?
I did not, but like I said, you have impressed a lot of people. He wrote a lot of stuff about WCW that's up on the WrestlingObserver.com website, and got a lot of compliments about it before the show started. I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing. I started reading it, though. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, I have three very particular questions I'd like to ask Mr. Bischoff. The first question is about how, undeniably over the past year plus, that WCW has alienated their core audience of pure wrestling fans, and if you consider them a viable part of your audience, and if you have any strategies planned to bring them back.
Yes, I do, consider wrestling fans to be a viable part of the audience. It still says wrestling on the marquee. I mean, wrestling is a category that attracts an audience for a certain reason. It's dynamic to watch. It's physical. It's good versus evil. It embodies, in my mind, the best of boxing and football and soap opera. But you have to have the wrestling element. You have to have the physical element. It can't be about wrestlers trying to be comedians or wrestlers trying to be, sitcom stars or wrestlers trying to become, actors. It's about wrestlers being good wrestlers. And yes, you have to have, certain skills that might fall into, an actor's category, but you've got to wrestle. You can't be a wrestling show and attract a wrestling audience without wrestling. In terms of strategies, it's no secret. I love the cruiserweight division. I thought it was one of the things that made Nitro different back in '95 and '96 and '97. I think it gave us an edge. I think it made us more fun to watch because it was more visually dynamic. And, you know, that's one of the strategies, although it's not an original one, but it's certainly one of the strategies that I want to go back to because I know that it'll work.
And specifically relating to that question, I was wondering if you've heard of a guy named Chris Daniels, who I believe could be a tremendous asset to achieving that goal and bringing back the wrestling fans who I think would tune in specifically to see him.
Honestly, I've heard the name a number of different times, but I can't say that I'm familiar with him, and I'd love to see his work. Because right now, I mean, there's some good cruiserweights in WCW right now, and I know that there's a lot. And the other great thing about cruiserweights is there's just more of them. There's just more guys out there. There's a bigger pool of talent to choose from. The average American isn't 275 pounds and ripped up, and there's just a much bigger pool, and that means it's more likely that you're going to find guys who are capable of doing really dynamic, physical, fun things to watch, but also have a lot of charisma. So, for all the right reasons, not only do I want to see what Chris Daniels has to offer, but we're going to be going after that cruiserweight division in a big way.
Okay, for my second question, I'm going to try to phrase this as politely as possible because I don't want to annoy you in any way, but you have an obvious predilection for brand names and established older stars. And I'd like to know if you really think that's what the wrestling fan of today and the generation coming up of wrestling fans really want to see.
By the way, good job. Not pissing me off, but
very well worded.
But you try to understand that I favor brand names and I value them. But I value them for the right reason. It's not that I think solely, a business is going to survive and prosper, solely on our ability to attract and maintain the same big names. But you have to have those, going back to some of my comments earlier, you have to have names that people recognize and feel strongly about in order to benefit people that you're bringing up. I think one of the things in a very drastic way that WCW has done, incorrectly over the last 6 months or a year is trying to just thrust young guys down everybody's throat without the benefit of working them in storylines and putting them in the limelight with guys who have, something to offer. In other words, let me give you an example. Diamond Dallas Page. Now, okay, everybody knows he's a friend of mine. I'm probably using him as an example, because of that, but that's not the case. Diamond Dallas Page was a guy who he tried everything in the world to get himself over, and none of it worked. I tried to do things to get him over, and really none of it worked. The only thing that really started to get him over at a point where he started, to break into that, top third, if you will, was when we worked him into an angle with Randy Savage. Because Randy was a name that everybody recognized, and it was a story that drew everybody's attention, and it was interesting to watch. Diamond Dallas Page benefited from Randy's brand name, and that's why I believe in brand names. You can't build young talent without them.
At the same time, I think when Hulk Hogan and Billy Kidman worked that thing, I think they both ended up coming out the worst for it when it was over.
Well, you're right, Dave, and you have to be smart enough to use judgment, because sometimes, either because the story dictates it or because the chemistry just isn't there, instead of a Diamond Dallas Page elevating to a certain degree to Randy Savage's level in terms of perception, because that's what this is all about, instead of Billy Kidman going up a notch, Hulk Hogan came down a notch. And that's not a knock on Billy. That was more probably a knock on the storyline and the planning and the creativity that went into the process. It was
a bad matchup, I think, because the size difference, and then Billy Kidman was playing the heel, and so it's really hard for Billy Kidman to get a lot of heat, so people would have sympathy for Hulk Hogan. When they had that big size difference, and also that big disparity in star power. I mean, nobody believed Billy Kidman was ever going to beat Hulk Hogan.
And
even when he did, nobody believed it.
The audience has to believe it could be true. It could happen. It could be. Doesn't mean that it is true, and it is possible, but at least could be. There's got to be a reality factor here. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the characters were cast in the wrong roles and in retrospect, that's pretty obvious. But at the core of it, even beyond, being cast in the wrong roles, it just wasn't believable. Nobody is going to believe, a guy, and this is not a knock on Billy, because I love Billy Kidman. I think he's a great guy, and I like working with him. But nobody's going to believe that a 5'7" or 5'8" or 5'9" guy that weighs 165, 175 pounds is going to be able to kick the hell out of a guy that's 6'6" or 6'7" or however tall Hulk is and 260 pounds. I don't care if he is 45 years old. It's not going to happen.
Now, you were talking about a little bit earlier, you said, the problem with guys not wanting to put each other over, that wouldn't be as big a problem when, everyone was being successful and that sort of thing. But, like, right now when things are not successful, how are you going to approach this if, for example, you have a brand name like, say, a Kevin Nash, and you go up to him and say, look, we need you to put over this Chuck Palumbo kid, and we need to give him the rub, and, this person says, no, I'm not willing to do that right now.
I'm going to be careful how I answer that, but I'm not worried about that. And I'm when I say that, it's because I think it's pretty obvious to everyone in WCW right now that if they were as important as sometimes they think they are, we wouldn't have gotten a 2.2 last week. I think everybody recognizes in that company that in order for any individual to be strong, the company has to be strong. And in order for the company to be strong... I'm sorry?
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Eric.
And in order for the company to be strong, there has to be we have to build each other. There's no one person in that company right now that can carry that company. Everybody is going to have to tell stories for everybody else. Everybody is going to have to do what's required of them in order for the company to get healthy. And I honestly, I'll say it, knowing Kevin Nash is probably going to hear about this second and third hand and take it out of context. I'm not worried about Kevin Nash, quite frankly. I'm not worried about Kevin Nash saying I'm not going to do that. Both from the point of view that, if he feels that way, then I guess he probably doesn't fit into the big picture anyway. And if he walks out right now, it probably doesn't matter because how much lower are we going to go? And
anything else, Rob?
Yeah, I have one last question after he's done talking.
Go ahead.
Okay. The last question I want to ask specifically about the booking of the company and how the bookers now may have lost touch with the new audience.
Right.
And that a staff of Hollywood TV writers aren't going to be able to keep the pure wrestling audience. And maybe the best course of action would be to bring in someone completely new with fresh ideas who maybe hasn't worked in wrestling before and wants to innovate some new, fresh ideas.
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. I think you have to have, a wrestling foundation. You have to be able to kind of anticipate how the wrestling audience is going to react, to certain things. You can't just go completely, off the wall.
Wouldn't a fan know best about that?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't a fan know best about that, how the audience would react, do you think?
Some fans.
Some fans would. But,
yeah.
What you're really talking is about research. And one of the interesting things about fans is they all have different opinions.
Yeah,
they don't all think exactly alike. And, yeah, I guess you could bring a wrestling fan in and listen to storylines. And there are some people that I know are wrestling fans and not really in the wrestling business whose opinions, I value and I try to listen to, from time to time. But at the end of the day, this is a television company. It's a television product. And, writers, at least, whether they're from Hollywood or whether they come out of the world of wrestling, at least understand the product and understand how to tell a storyline and understand how to build an arc. And, it's a combination of people that understand the wrestling audience, wrestling fans, if you will, and people that really know how to write entertainment.
Well, I think right now...
Go ahead, Rob. We're really on a break, so make it real quick.
I think right now the best combination, though, is going to be someone who is young, who has been a wrestling fan for a large portion of their life, has a lot of love for the business, and understands the way wrestling TV works now. And I would like for you to check out my booking ideas I have up on the Wrestling Observer website when you get a chance.
You got it out there.
All right, I'll take a look at it.
Okay. Thanks a bunch, Rob. I want to ask this one last question, and it has to do with the TV taping schedule. A couple of months back, Brad Siegel made the call to eliminate the Tuesday shows and tape only on Monday, Nitro, and then Thunder. And it was a controversial decision. I thought, based on what the company wanted to do, which was save money, that it was the right call. But since then, that Thunder show, even when the matches are good, it's such a depressing show to watch because, you've got the small crowd and they're not into it. And it just I think it's really hurt the company when you throw that show out there every week. And
yeah, I agree with you. And when I heard that, I called Brad and tried to talk him out of making that decision. We've gone through that experience before when we used to tape, the WCW Saturday Night Show. This is obviously prior to Nitro, in front of a live audience, at Center Stage in Atlanta. The audience is everything. And if you take the audience out of the show, I don't care if you put, The Rock and Goldberg, in a match. If you do that in front of 60 people that don't know who The Rock is and don't know who, Goldberg is, it really doesn't translate very well. And there's no way you can ask an audience to sit in front of, sit in an arena for 4.5 hours and be enthusiastic about the product and care anymore. And yeah, it saves money in the short term, but in the long run, it kills your product and it kills your brand. And I agree with you 100%.
I got to ask one question, too.
Okay.
How much wrestling have you watched in your time off?
Not a lot.
Not a lot?
Not a lot. I drop into WWF, because quite frankly, I find it entertaining. I drop into WCW, quite frankly, because I'm concerned about some of the people that, I'm close to that are still there, and I'm curious as to, what they're doing. But I haven't sat down and studied, both shows, and I maybe watch on a Monday night. I probably spend about a half hour, maybe 40 minutes, between, both shows.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Hector in Texas. Hector, what's going on?
Yes. First of all, I want to congratulate you on your new job and wish you good luck. And I have a question regarding about WCW's image. In the past few years, the image of WCW has been very negative, and I wanted to know if a name change will be good for the company, and or a discipline code, like people like Steiner and Madden get the same treatment for saying things they're not supposed to.
Yeah, we've talked about, the name change, and a lot of people have suggested that. But, I think really if you turn the product around, if you make it interesting, you make it exciting, let me put it to you this way, and I'll try to keep this short. We're two good ideas away from being pretty interesting and pretty competitive again. Two big ideas. I don't think changing the name is necessarily the best idea. I think changing the product is a better idea. And in terms of discipline, I agree with what you're saying, but without going into any detail, one of the reasons, the reason Mark Madden left was probably somewhat different than what you've read about on the Internet and what Mark Madden has to say.
And my last thing is, what about Flair?
I don't know how to answer that. What's your question?
Is there any plans for him?
Absolutely. I talked to Ric Flair yesterday at length, and Ric Flair is one of those people who, he is, in many ways, he is wrestling in many ways. And when you have a character that strong, that well known, you've got to be able to be smart enough to find a way to use him that's very positive for both Ric Flair as a character and the business. And I'm comfortable with our ability to do that.
All right. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
Okay, let's go to Tony. Tony, what's up?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Good.
All right. Listen, Eric, first question. When you first started Nitro, it was a brash move that definitely paid off going head-to-head on Monday nights. But now, things have changed so much in a 4 or 5 year period. Do you ever give any consideration to now possibly, putting the two shows together and doing just one big super show a week on possibly a night when there is no other wrestling?
Well, no. No, for two reasons. No, I don't believe in going to an alternative night because I think one of the things that I think one of the things I am definitely most proud of is the fact that I think I'm somewhat responsible, and when I say I mean we, at WCW, are really responsible for growing the category. When we launched Nitro and we went head-to-head with Raw, everybody said, you're so far behind, they're the incumbent, they've been there forever, you're never going to succeed, you don't know how to do this, there's no way it's ever going to work. And it worked. And it worked not only for WCW's benefit, but it worked for wrestling's benefit because the competition between the two companies and the fact that we were head-to-head actually grew the interest and grew the category. And I think by throwing in the towel and moving to a night when there is no wrestling would be the dumbest thing that we could do. My goal would be to go head-to-head really. Instead of starting at 8 o'clock, start at 9 o'clock and be more direct competition. And I think that is what's going to grow not only WCW's ratings, but grow the category again.
You think going head-to-head will grow the overall ratings of the
viewers in the industry, huh?
It has. I mean, history.
It absolutely did the first time, yeah.
Yeah, but it was somewhat short-lived, though.
No, it isn't. I mean, even today, even in WCW's depressed kind of environment, right now there are 7.5, sometimes 8 rating points a week out there,
right,
in professional wrestling. Whereas before we went head-to-head, there was only 3. So I can't disagree more strongly. I think that the wrestling category is stronger today by virtue of the fact that we went head-to-head. Someone asked me one time, WCW, WWF, talking about the business and is it real, is it fake, which I'm so tired of answering that question. The only thing real to the wrestling audience is the competition between the two companies. That's real, and that's interesting, and that's exciting, and that will grow the category. To throw in the towel and just try to find another night, I think would be bad for the wrestling business.
I got a question on the ownership. And besides the Fusian, who I guess is the majority owner, and I guess TBS has maintained a minority interest, are there any other like well-known companies that we might have heard of that have bought in on a minority interest basis?
Yes, and I'm not at liberty to discuss that now. I think we're going to have another press conference when the deal closes within the next 30 or 60 days. Once everything is finalized, there'll be another press conference, and at that time, those names will be revealed, and there's going to be some,
And my final comment, I'd like to give my booking idea.
Oh, I knew you would.
I've got to give you the dream team, announcing team you should go with.
All right, who's that?
Well, I think everybody's waiting for you to bring back Mongo with David Crockett.
No.
All right, guys, later on.
Okay, let's go to Chris. Chris, what's up?
Hi, how's it going? I just wanted to ask Mr. Bischoff if he's going to go with active wrestlers as bookers anymore, because in the past it's really killed a lot of the product in WCW, especially when Kevin Nash was booking, and I think it's a bad idea all around, and I just hope it's not something that they go back to doing.
Go. Okay. Eric, are you still there? Oh, Eric's not there. Oh, my God. Okay. Chris, is anyone there? Brian? I have to talk on my own here. Okay. It's been an interesting show. We're going to get Eric Bischoff back right. We only have a few minutes left. I just hope, I hope this thing goes, because, wrestling, one thing that he just talked about, as far as, I think that the optimum period of wrestling was a couple of years back when everybody was fighting over every quarter hour, and there was a lot of hot-shotting going on, but it did make Monday Night Viewing very exciting, and Monday Night Viewing has lost a lot of its excitement when it got one-sided. So anyway, Eric, you're
back with you. To answer the question, no, I have no intentions of bringing wrestlers in as bookers, for the reason that you brought up. It just it doesn't work. There's perception becomes a problem, egos become a problem. It just doesn't work. So that that's not going to be the case.
Okay, is David there? Chris. Oh, Chris. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Hi, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, sorry. And I was also curious about the rumors about him taking the show to like one location every week in Vegas or somewhere. And I've even heard Orlando. I don't know if there's any truth to the rumors, but that you were going to do the show, or like Nitro in particular, I guess, every week from one location, and where it would almost become, as far as the audience goes, a tourist attraction in that area. Are there any truth to that rumor?
We have discussed it. I mean, there's a laundry list of about 1,000 different ideas and approaches that a number of people want to take to this, and everybody has a suggestion. And it's certainly one of the things that we have discussed, and we've discussed it seriously, but no commitment has been made in that regard.
Do you think that's going to hurt in the long run? Well, I mean, I'm sure it'll help financially as far as for the travel from going from arena to arena, but like I said, after a while it's going to be more of a tourist attraction, and you're going to start to get fans that really aren't familiar with the product and aren't familiar with certain guys other than names like Hulk Hogan and maybe a Bill Goldberg or certain names like that, but mainly even the older names like Hogan and people from the past that they're going to come and expect to see. And in the long run, it's going to hurt because you know that you have to develop new talent. If you have those guys in position that in the past, and according to every wrestler that's been in WCW, have been squashing the talent that's come up, the guys that came up, and as soon as there was the slightest inclination that they were getting over, the guys on top, again, to name names like Kevin Nash and so forth, would do whatever they could in their own political way to stop it, to squash it, and Hulk Hogan included. And I know he's a friend of yours, but this is, what all the consensus has been from everybody.
Well, okay, now you're a politician, and I understand your position, and I appreciate your opinion, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. But to answer what I think your question was in the beginning, certainly if we're going to go to a fixed location, your point is very well taken, and it's a very good point. The only way that something like that would work is if there was a way to attract a fresh audience that was a wrestling audience. In my mind, that's the only way that decision would work, and that's why no commitment has been made in that regard. It is a good idea from a financial point of view. It may be a good idea for a lot of other reasons, but it may be a bad idea if you can't find a way to bring in a wrestling audience, because the audience is the show.
Okay. And like I said, as far as the creation of new stars, you said you're not worried about guys like Kevin Nash, because there's nobody in that company right now that is more important than the company that can throw the company on their back and take you guys. Especially with last week, I think the last 2 quarter hours did like a 1-5 with some of the bigger names and the supposed bigger names in the company, and including the world champion, and that was going up against the match that The Rock had with referees involved, and it was sort of like WWF's co-main event that they put up against Nitro's main event. And if you're going to have these guys, I guess they're not going to be able to do it to you because you know better, but they've been influencing the people there to give them a perception that they're these big stars, when in fact they're not any more important to the company right now than Sean Stasiak and Chuck Palumbo are. And I just hope that doesn't continue, because otherwise these young guys that are there, like a Lance Storm or somebody that has a lot of talent, aren't ever going to get to break through like guys in the past, like Chris Benoit and everybody that jumped to the WWF, Chris Jericho, that were never given a chance to just...
But let's talk about Chris Jericho. This is, I don't want to get into a big debate, but let's talk about Chris Jericho. Do you think Chris Jericho is any better positioned on the WWF roster than he was when he was in WCW?
I think from at least a perception standpoint, I think he was given a chance in WCW. I'm not saying he wasn't necessarily given a total chance, but I don't think he would have ever gotten to the point where he was going to break through and become that next level star.
Has he broken through and become that next level star?
No, but I think he's at that point where they put him in the programs with the top guys, Rock and Triple H.
They did, and they took him out, and they put him back in the middle again. Is that the right way to build a star?
I don't think it is, but I think being that they have so many, like you said, they're hot right now, and it's like they can sort of thrust. Chris Jericho's at that level where they can sort of put him in any role that they want him right now. Is
that any different than what we did with Chris Jericho when we had him in WCW?
He's a hotter character merchandise-wise, though. I mean, like
he's a hotter character merchandise-wise because from a merchandising point of view, WWF, is just doing a much better job. But in terms of where he is in the roster and where he is in the storyline, quite frankly, other than Chris, who's been worked in and out of that kind of semi-main event position, taking Chris out of it, Jericho, Eddie, and Dean are, in my opinion, probably less significant to the WWF roster than they were to the WCW roster.
I think Jericho is more, Benoit is more, Malenko, maybe the same. Guerrero, I don't think Guerrero's any more. I mean, he's had more interview time. He's had a chance to be in a little higher profile programs, but at the same time, I think Eddie Guerrero, because he's been injured a lot, he's lost a lot. He's had momentum. He's been up and down with the momentum. One thing I want to ask before we run out of time is any plans as far as cutting back the number of pay-per-views, or do you think that one a month you're going to stay with that schedule? And also, as far as what is the long-term future as far as touring on the road?
Your first question, no, we don't plan on scaling back, pay-per-views. We just want to make them better. We want to make them bigger. We want to make them stronger. That's the goal, not cutting them back. In terms of touring, the idea is going to be to build up enough interest in the product, to build the stars, to build the interest in WCW as a whole, so that touring live becomes profitable again. Touring in the live event part of this business is a huge part of this business. If we do cut back, it will only be in order to fix the product, put the wheels back on the car because they've fallen off. it's hard to change the tire when the car is going down the road at 60 miles an hour. So, in terms of live events, yeah, we'll pull off the side of the road, get the wheels fixed, get the tires back on, and then head down the road again. But no, we're not going to cut back on pay-per-views.
Okay, Dave in St. Louis.
How you doing?
Real good.
I'm stuck here in St. Louis, Missouri, and I've been a wrestling fan all my life.
By the way, I'm really sorry to hear that, but
yeah,
go ahead.
In the middle of America, but I mean, I've been a wrestling fan all my life. I'm 32 years old, yet I have lots of friends that are 18 and young and know what's hip and up. I have ideas in my head that I just know would sell merchandise, give you good ratings, and make people like Prince Iaukea into The Rock. And I'd like to know what I could possibly do to maybe help you, Eric.
Well, I can't give you my home phone number right now, but maybe Dave has some suggestions, and maybe you can post some things on WrestlingObserver.com. And I check in with Dave's site, on almost a daily basis. And if he's got a way to post your input, I'm sure I'll pick it up.
Because you talked about acting coaches to and creative people to come in, and maybe someone from the outside to give some great ideas for booking. And I think you should go with that instead of relaxed approach and see what happens. And you should.
Oh, hey, let me tell you right now, there will be no relaxed approach. I'm not sure where you got that from, and I'm not taking the position of, well, let's just throw it up against the wall and see what happens. It's going to be very aggressive, and there's going to be some radical changes. But listen, if you've got ideas, post them on Dave's site. I'll pick them up.
Ideas that make your head spin and your eyes roll in the back of your head.
Okay, well then send them. Okay.
All right.
We are like way past time, but I want to thank Eric for being here today, and hopefully we'll have him on, and we'll have a better relationship with WCW, and WCW will improve because the industry needs an alternative product, and it's nothing against any company. We want to see the brand grow, the entire brand grow. It was a lot more exciting, I think, wrestling two years ago when it was a dogfight 3 years ago. Anyway, we all hope for the best. I want to thank you, Eric, and of course, thanks, Brian. And we'll see everybody Tuesday at 5.